Hey people, welcome back. And in this session, we are going to learn about the basics of process capability. So what is process capability? Process capability is a measure, or I'll say a statistical measure of the inherent process variability, which means how much is the variation my process have or can have or may have. That measure of variation in statistical ways your process capability. This measure we do for any given characteristics or the parameter. Like as sometimes we may are measuring the quality, sometimes we measuring productivity, sometimes we are measuring cost, sometimes we are measuring turnaround time, or all the kind of variation we measure in the form of process capability. If it is measured properly of the process to the specification, this is expressed as the process capability index or process performance index. So index means the number. What are the numbers that is representing the capability? Output of the measurement is often illustrated by the histogram and calculated and predict how many part or how much percent of the part will be out of the specification. Suppose you are producing 100, out of 100, how many may fall outside the specification? Or if we are producing 1 million, 1,000, 10,000, how many will be outside the specification, or how much percentage will be outside the specification, or how much percent data will fit within the specification, or 100% minus the data will fit within the specification will be a defect. So we are trying to calculate what is the capability of my process that data will be produced within the specification or given specification. So process capability compares the output of an in-control process to the specification limit by using the capability indices. Those are CP, CPK, and CPM, or PP, PPK, and PPM. I will tell you about that. So the comparison is made by forming a ratio of the spread between the process specification, which is your basically specification width, the difference between the LSL and USL, to the spread of the process values, or spread of the process values we measure in the form of standard deviation. So how much is the variation your process can tolerate? Basically LSL and USL difference divided by what is the actual variation you have, which is the standard deviation, will give you the capability value. So the ability of process to meet the specification can be expressed as a single number using the capability index, or it can be assessed using the control charts. There are some definitions, severally common, basically common process capability index that we use in the industry. One is CP. So CP is the most common process capability index, which estimate what the process is capable of producing if the process mean were to be calculated, or mean was in centered between the specification limit, which means if you have lower specification limit and upper specification limit, take the difference of that and divide by 6 times of standard deviation, you will get the CP value. So USL minus LSL divided by the 6 times of standard deviation. Now CPK is the index is similar to CP, but it takes into account the process mean and the deviation from the target value. So what is your average value? What is your target value? The difference between that divided by the 3 times of standard deviation will be the CPK value. The PP index measure the capability based on the total process variation. So CP is called as in short term, CPK also called as in short term, where the PP is called as in long term and PPK is also long term. So when you say part of the variation, part of the variation means sample data you are collecting initially for the validation or testing purpose is CP/CPK you are calculating. And when you are calculating the entire process data, when the process is running as a BAU, business as usual, then it's a PP and PPK. So PPK index is done similar to the PP, but it takes into the account the process mean and the deviation from the target value. I will be explaining all these calculations in the upcoming sessions. And another and most important term in the CP/CPK, we use the CPM. So this is the index we use when the process mean is not centered between the specification limit. Basically, mean is shifted either towards the upper side or maybe towards the lower side of a specification. These indices, all CP, CPK, CPP, PPK, CPM, used to determine the capability of a process to meet customer requirement and to identify areas of improvement. The choice of index, either you are going to use CP, CPK, PP, PPK, CPM, will depend on the type of data you are analyze, the stability of the process, and what exactly the business requirement is or the customer requirement is. Now, let us understand the difference between process capability versus the process performance. So process capability is a process performance are both indicator used to determine the current performance of the process. There are some differences in these two concepts. So what is the process capability? It is a statistical measure of the inherent process variability of a given characteristics, whichever the characteristics or the parameter you are measuring. It compares the output of an in-control process to the specification limit by using the capability indices, which is CP/CPK or PP/PPK. It is expressed as the capability index and the performance index. So capability index is CP, performance index is your CPK. And the same goes for the long-term data PP and PPK. It is measurable property of a process to the specification. It is used to assess the ability of a process to meet a specification. And it is a forecast of how well the process will perform in the future. While the process performance, it is applies to a specific batch of the material, evaluates real historical data of the process. Very similar to the process capability, but it looks in the rear view mirror of the process. The measure how consistently the manufacturing or any process can produce part within the specification. It is assessed using the control chart. It is an evaluation of how well a process performed in the past. In summary, process capability is a measure of inherent variability of a given characteristics, while the process performance evaluate how well the process performed in the past. So the calculation part, when we come, CP is the formula. You will take the difference of the specification limit USL minus LSL divide by 6 times of standard deviation. While CPK is the minimum value of CPKU and CPKL. While the CPKU you calculate taking the upper specification limit minus the average value divide by 3 times of standard deviation. PPKU will be calculated, CPKL will be calculated by taking the mean difference to the lower specification limit divided by 3 times of standard deviation. So whenever we use the word CP or CPK, which means we are talking about the short term. Short term, the example wise, if we say when you are taking a new machine, suppose you are doing the validation of the machine, instead of running on a full scale, you are running for just a couple of number of sample. You are doing the validation or you are doing the piloting, then we call this as a short term. The same thing, if you want to calculate for the long term instead of short term, so long term thing represented by the PP and PPK. Formula remain exactly same, nothing changes, only the nomenclature will change from CP to PP. That's all. So C will replaced by the P here. So PP is equal to USL minus LSL divided by 6 times of standard deviation. PPK will be the minimum value of PPKU and PPKL. Whichever is minimum, that will be your PPK. Similar way, the PPKU will be calculated by the USL minus mean divided by 3 standard deviation, and PPKL will be calculated by mean minus LSL divided by 3 standard deviation. Now question is, many people are confused, then how to differentiate these two? So answer is very simple. If it is a short term, is CP-CPK. If it is a long term, PP-PPK. But still formula remains same. So the only difference between short term and long term is how do you calculate your standard deviation. So standard deviation for the short term is calculated by using the range method. If you are using the standard deviation by range method, and that standard deviation you are using in the calculation of capability, it will give you CP-CPK. If you are using the standard deviation by or calculating the standard deviation by using the deviation method, then it will be your PP and PPK. That's the only difference. So I will tell you when I'll explain the calculation of CP, CPK and PP, PPK. CP, CPK, I will be explaining you how to calculate the standard deviation using the range method. And PP, PPK, I will explain you about how to calculate the standard deviation using the deviation method. Thank you so much, people. I will see you in the next session.